Sorry, a little bit of a sore throat.
Just hammered that dinner down, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I had tuna fish sandwich. Yeah. Oh, did you ever listen to Yuri's podcast?
No, I did not. We
Yeah,
were this Friday night. We had a banquet. It was actually a ball,
yeah,
St. Luke's ball, and then what were we doing Saturday? It was pretty much an all day thing, and then today was a blur as well. So it was 2 days of just craziness. And I tried to reach out to my son too earlier in the weekend, and even just to get a hold of him, just to talk to him. They were up in New York pretty much the whole week, so it's like they're just busy. You know what I mean? Their kids are right around that age, and they're trying to stay connected with her family as well too, because they're all over the map. So it's don't take it as a slight. I can't even get through to them, man.
no, I get that. You know, I can't even remember the questions I had asked them anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was funny. I had a lot of good responses to the previous episode, and even the one before that.
yeah.
But the biggest, not complaint, is people were like, "We miss Phil."
Come, Isaiah. Come on, dude.
I'm serious. You've
Uh,
amassed a little fan base because
I'll say this, and this is something that um, there's several guys that I've been there for, um, just to listen to and learn, because I think my generation, instead of opening our mouths and thinking we have the answers, it's definitely in our best interest just to listen to hear what's happening, because so much is happening that we don't understand, we don't get, uh, and a couple gentlemen like yourself, it's late 20s, early 30s, and I'm just there for the same thing. No podcast, but it's like I think this is where God's got me, so I'm just listening.
yeah. No, you should be encouraged though, because I
Yeah.
mean, you have a little fan club growing.
I said, dude, I'd like say three things in like a 45-minute clip, and then two of them are questions.
Maybe I should start doing the same thing. Maybe people like
Oh,
me more.
oh my.
That's all right. That's why you have co-hosts, right?
Yeah,
They
that's
kind
exactly why you have
of
co-hosts. That's
they distract
exactly.
you. They distract you from the host.
Jesus. Oh my word, you're so bad, dude. It's that tuna fish, dude. It's trying to come back up, man. It's coming.
Yeah, I used Greek yogurt instead of mayonnaise, and I think that was the problem.
That's a foul. You use Greek yogurt?
Yeah,
Fish.
yeah, that's like a diet hack, but I don't know. I'll get to that.
Oh, that's nasty. And your stomach's trying to throw it back up.
All right. Welcome to the Generation F podcast. F stands for faith. This show is about having real conversations on wrestling with faith between two different generations' perspectives. My name is Isaiah. I'm here with my co-host Phil. Today we are going into a new episode with the idea of willingness. I'm going to call it, as a working title, Willingness to be Imperfect. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of cover today, Phil, with this episode is the idea of perfectionism. This is actually based off of a listener's question that was kind of submitted to us, made this episode kind of materialize. What are your thoughts on the trendy term perfectionism and how this may relate also to our human nature? I'll give you a little bit of a context before we break into it. So this idea with perfectionism is a viral idea within the past couple of years, I'd say, more so spiritually, but also psychologically, with holding yourself to, a higher standard. I have a definition here of the issue. Perfectionism is the tendency to set unrealistically high standards for oneself or others, tying self-worth to flawlessness, performance, and viewing mistakes as failures. And this is kind of used in kind of like a spiritual lens. One of the bigger scriptures that this movement is kind of looking at is in the book of Matthew in the New Testament. It's Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 48. And I'm going to start off by reading that before we kind of break into this idea of what perfectionism kind of means to us. And I also have some other supporting scriptures to kind of back up, my answers, if you will. In the Children's Bible in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43, it says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemies.' But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who hurt you. If you do this, then you will be true sons of your Father in heaven. Your Father causes the sun to rise on good people and on bad people. Your Father sends rain to those who do good and to those who do wrong. If you love only the people who love you, then you will get no reward. Even the tax collectors do that. And if you are nice only to your friends, then you are no better than the other people. Even people without God are nice to their friends. So you must be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." And that last line is really the crux to this. I don't want to say movement, but definitely the problem where people are basing what I want to say like an unrealistic expectation of their own faith, or wrestling with even attempting to have faith, with this idea of being perfect within the lens of how Jesus, who was speaking in that passage, had called us to be. And just to kind of give a little bit of a background on that scripture, this is a part of what we call like the Sermon on the Mount, um, where he's giving a lot of different lectures and sermons to his followers, or people that are trying to hear more about what he has to say. So that other passage is just like a snippet within this larger overarching theme. But that last little line is kind of basing this, this movement, if you will. So, Phil, one of the things that I wanted you to talk about, if you will, the idea of spiritual perfectionism, or even just psychological perfectionism. What does that mean to you? And later on, we'll kind of break it down generationally. I don't want to cover that just yet, but just viscerally, when you hear those definitions and that scripture, what are your first thoughts?
So first thoughts for me while you were reading that scripture and then got to the end, that last line, it's a jolt, but it is definitely a reflection too on the two natures that we have if we're followers of Jesus. Sin nature, but then there's also a heavenly nature that we get through adoption as sons and daughters. And in Romans chapter 7, it talks about the conflict of those two natures and the fact that we are constantly at war with the two natures are constantly at war within our body, within our being. And there's certain ways to have victory over that. But I think one of the key components as well, too, is Satan, the enemy. Very willing and capable to accuse us and bring us back to this sin nature that we were born into. And that was a struggle for me, because when I was younger, growing up, we were taught, even in the church, better to look good than to feel good, right? Better to the outward person is really what matters, the outward appearance. So if you have the appearance of being a spiritual person, if you have the appearance of following after God and do the right things, say the right things, that's really what matters. And that's so deadly, so deadly. That's what I grew up with. And so God, had to start from the inside and renew and bring through certain situations in my life to bring that reality home. And some of them were difficult. They were painful. So that is my initial piece when you first read that very hit close to me,
Yeah, I like how you said that when you grew up, where they wanted you to rather look good than be good.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely an interesting angle that I didn't really understand generationally. But One of the things that I really want to kind of use this idea for is for people that, people that, again, like they're maybe on the fence about who Jesus is, and they have friends that are believers, or friends that are trying to live by example, and they come across that passage, and they don't know the Bible from anything, right? And their first visceral reaction is, well, I can't do that because it's unattainable, right? That's kind of what I gathered from a lot of the movement of perfectionism is to. And I do want to kind of break into the context that I have. I have something in the Old and the New Testament that I want to kind of use to support what you just said. In our last episode, the guest that we had on did a really good job at kind of talking about that being the first step to, uh, 1,000 miles, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with like one step, right? How would someone navigate that perceived obstacle within that line?
Yeah. Great question. I don't have the answer to that right away. I just know I can share some of what my experience was, and like I said, it was a slow process of, and I'm going to use the word transformation. So that's really changing from one person set of ideals to another. And the first set was definitely almost like a fake religion, almost like a cardboard cutout of what it was supposed to be to follow God. And this is what I put up in front of other people, almost like a wall. So that's what people saw, and it was definitely fake. Um, and then I think the transformation, that change started when God brought, like I was talking about, some of those situations into my life that really challenged my understanding of who He was, and really I allowed the Holy Spirit to come in and just start working in my life. And it is a daunting project too, because I'm talking in spiritual terms, and a lot of people don't necessarily relate to that, but really, um, you search for God. If you cry out to God, He is definitely faithful, and He's not going to leave you on the curbside. And that's kind of what I did. I was like, uh, this is not working. This cardboard cutout that I put up in front of people, to make them think that I'm a believer, to make them think that I'm authentic and real. It wasn't working, and then that started the process, this transformation. That, okay, well, what is real? What is the way to God? How do I please Him? Or, in your words from Matthew, there, how do I become perfect? Because that's the command. And it was a process. I think a lot of things in myself had to come to terms with my inability to be perfect, and then God stepped in, and that's really when the transformation started. When I allowed God to take control, and really started to seek His presence. I think, and I don't know if that's explaining it well or not, Isaiah.
I think it is,
Yeah.
especially in the beginning. And I think it's a part of what we might call spiritual discipline, but also physical discipline.
Mhm.
If you're
Mhm.
starting something new, you might not want to do it, or you may not know how to do it, but you kind of go through the initial motions before it starts to make more sense.
Yeah.
It's like going for a run. Like, you don't know exactly how to run, but you kind of go outside and start moving your feet really fast, and try and figure out things on the fly. I wanted to go into this one part in the Old Testament, and we're going to go into the New, and we're going to kind of talk about how this kind of supports giving clarity to how people should interpret it. So in the Old Testament, I have the book of Isaiah. It's going to be Isaiah 55. In Isaiah 55, verse 8, again, this Isaiah the prophet's kind of speaking on behalf of, God through him. He says, "The Lord says, your thoughts are not like my thoughts. Your ways are not like my ways. Just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. And my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, Rain and snow fall from the sky. They don't return without watering the ground. They cause the plants to sprout and grow, and the plants make seeds for the farmer. And from these seeds, people have bread to eat. The words I say do the same thing. They will not return to me empty. They will make the things happen that I want to happen. They succeed in doing what I send them to do. That passage might come off as poetic in nature, but one of the things that I really like about this passage is really that first line. Even if we can't even get that far into it without getting lost mentally, your thoughts are not like my thoughts. And it's this idea that even though, like, the Son of God, Jesus, calls us to be perfect, there's this comparative lens that even if we're trying to be perfect like Jesus, we're still not as perfect as God could have been, could be, right? There's like this notion that, no matter how hard we try, there's still this divide, right? So that already kind of separates this notion that we are expected to be supernaturally perfect in everything that we do, at least in an unfair, expectation, right? Uh, another thing that I really kind of see here is this idea that God is kind of using this comparison between, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. He's using this like alliteration of the sky and rain and snow, whereas we even if we shoot towards perfection, we're still, thousands of miles away from what it could be, right? And that's one of the things that I really get from reading that passage. Phil, what are your thoughts on that little excerpt, that little eight verses?
Don't you think that brings perspective? I say, you know what I mean? Because we're never going to be perfect. We just aren't. You know what I mean? Because we've got a human body, we've got um, a human thought process. There's really nothing in us that would be able to achieve perfection in God's perspective. But the command is still there, right? Be perfect, even as I am perfect. And that's the tough one. I liked your comment from before when you said, fake it till you make it. And
Mm.
there's some substance to that. You know what I mean? Because that resonated with me because that was my experience. A lot of once I started this path on transformation and said, away with the cardboard cutout and let's really follow God. Um, there was times where I'm like, this is not going to work, or I'm not feeling it. I'm just not. It's not working. And I just kept going, and it was persistence. And I really think that was God as well too, just drawing me in. But we're never. I don't. We're never going to be perfect. But the command is still there: be perfect, and that's a tough one to reconcile. How do you explain that to somebody? That's a scriptural concept, you know.
Yeah, the word fake it till you make it probably wasn't the best choice because most people, if they fake it, they just fake it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
They don't make it. So I think just so the audience can kind of understand that difference is, you know, you're not expected to actually fake it. It's more so the idea that whenever you're trying to create some kind of a transformation, even in the physical realm, there needs to be a a level of inertia, right? A momentum needs to kind of start from some fixed point, right? Where you're not just automatically at the finish line. There needs to be some kind of forward movement to get to that speed or get to that distance. And very much the same spiritually, where it's, maybe the idea of faking it is more so doing so um, without understanding of where you're going, maybe not having your whole heart into it because you don't know what to expect. But there is this difference between faking it and not truly believing in what you're doing versus having some sort of faith in the idea, but you're just kind of going through the motions because you just don't know what's going to happen next, right? And I just kind of wanted to clarify that because I was in mind jail with that statement. Um, um, I would even ask, like, why do you think Jesus said that? If I'm talking to someone and they ask that question, like, oh, well, Jesus said that I have to be perfect. Why do you think he said that? Why do you think he said that without some kind of immediate um, description or breakdown like he would do in the later books where there was some kind of, uh, you know, uh, allegory or, parable where there was some kind of uh, actual description of what he was saying.
I'm back
Yeah.
to this Romans chapter 7, Isaiah,
Yeah.
and the struggle between good and evil, the two natures. And at the end of that chapter, um, Paul says, "Wretched man that I am, who's going to set me free from the body of this death?" So there's a recognition that there's a lot um, of struggling and warfare, even within our own selves, and that's a hard thing to comprehend. It's like, okay, there's a good and there's an evil, but it's all wrapped up in the same person, and that warfare is just continual. That alone is a daunting thing to think about. And then his question, who will set me free, or who's going to win this battle? Thanks be to God, who through Christ Jesus our Lord, who set me free from this battle between the good and evil. And I think that's, for me, that was the start point of understanding this whole idea of perfection, because it's really not our perfection that we put on. When we become believers, when we accept Jesus, we accept his personhood, his, who he is, and that's perfection. And so we get that just by being sons and daughters of his. That's something that's his nature. That's kind of handed over to us. So that's what I would stand on. If somebody asked me that, or where's your perfection? That's in Jesus, because in this body, there's not a lot of perfection.
Yeah, I also think it's okay to just not have the answer. Something that I always try and do as a coach, if someone asks me a question, I'll just tell them, like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to find out for you somehow. One of the things that I try and be very careful of, especially externally, is overusing my own interpretations of things, because
Mm-hmm.
I could be right, it could be wrong, but I don't want to have to make someone else's mind up for them. And when I read that line, and I understand the context to that kind of a movement, at least virally or online, where people are afraid of faith because they just don't feel like they can ever amount to what's expected of them to be, like, quote unquote holy. Um, I would just say I don't know. I don't know exactly why he said that, but there are, like you said, scriptures that we're using to kind of give a comparative to what he could have meant. But
Mm-hmm.
why he
Mm-hmm.
actually use that word, I would see it more as this idea of, um, if you shoot for the stars and miss, you'll end up on the moon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of that notion where if you have such a high goal as perfection and you come short of it, you're still in a better spot than you are currently. But one of the things that we'll talk about in the later segment is how people are just really struggling with this idea because it becomes, triggering in a way, and it becomes self-defeating to have that expectation of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the scriptures that I picked in the New Testament that is kind of similar to what you kind of grabbed onto was in Philippians. It's actually Philippians 3, verses 12 through 16. And again, Philippians is a very, very small book. It's only like 4 or 5 chapters, and it's at the very end of the Bible. So if you kind of move too fast, you'll miss it. Continuing toward our goal. This is Paul again. This is an epistle of Paul. It says, "I do not mean that I am already as God wants me to be. I have not yet reached that goal, but I continue trying to reach it and make it mine. Christ wants me to do that. That is the reason Christ made me his. Brothers, I know that I have not yet reached that goal, but there is one thing I always do. I forget the things that are past. I try as hard as I can to reach the goal that is before me. I keep trying to reach the goal and get the prize. That prize is mine because God called me through Christ to the life above." Another highlighted verse is, all of us who have grown spiritually to be mature should think this way too. And if there are things you do not agree with, God will make them clear to you. But we should continue following the truth we already have, right? I think that's, like, in my opinion, the biggest, lightning bolt when I read that last little verse. If there are already things that you just don't understand, right? God will make them clear to you, right? Because they weren't clear to me when I read it initially. Um, and they might be completely difficult for anyone else to understand unless they've kind of spent the time to wrestle with these ideas, faith. But even, in the church, we kind of model ourselves after how Paul kind of did a lot of different things, right? But even he says that, like, I didn't even do what I was supposed to do, right? So there's this nature that, okay, we have in the Gospels, Jesus gives that command to, okay, I want you to be perfect. And then we have in the Old Testament, there's a lot of different things I could have pulled from, but there's this idea that God's saying it's, all right, no matter how high you shoot, I'm still above that, right? And then we have Paul saying, like, hey, listen, I'm not even coming close to where I'm supposed to be. And you're supposed to be modeling yourself after me, right? At least in a physical, more attainable way, because, to those people, he was a little bit easier to model after, given the state of the church. So how does that kind of tie into this idea, Phil?
I would like to read one verse further in Philippians
Yeah,
3 there, verse 15. So my version says, let us therefore, as many as are perfect, have this attitude. And if anything, you have a different attitude, God will reveal that also. So what is that word perfect? What does that mean? You know what I
yeah,
mean? I don't know. Right. He just got done describing himself as less than perfect. And then
right.
and then he says, oh, by the way, everyone who's perfect.
And that's why I love this podcast, is because we don't have to have the answers to wrestle with these ideas, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we clearly see the answer in real time being resolved if we know how to navigate the Bible. But it still leaves room for, difficulty in some people when they're reading some of the Gospels, because they're trying to, do I take this literally? Like, what does he really mean? And I think it's important to have that lack of clarity, because that is, in my opinion, where God kind of comes through, right? If you have this sincere unawareness about what you're trying to learn, you would ask God, to give some kind of guidance through these words or an idea. And like my previous guest said on the last episode, it's, you're going to get an answer, but it's not going to happen in a timeline that you want, or it's not going to show up in the way that you think it's going to show up. It's going to come in a different form, and you have to be willing and aware enough to kind of keep your eyes out to see how it comes to you. I was reading some articles online about psychological analysis on perfectionism and how it pertains to the religious world. One of the biggest things that I've seen in the question below that I have here, and with the nature of the scriptures that we were reading, is this idea that perfection, is contextual in some way, right? Depending on who's saying it and how they're using it to gauge our understanding of, like, what's being asked, right? Jesus called us to be perfect like him because he wanted us to model ourselves after him, because that was the only exposure that those people had to, you know, God in the flesh, right? God on earth, right? And in the Old Testament, there is no physical manifestation. So there's a lot of poetic language used to give an understanding of how to endure and how to persevere, but still know that you're not there yet, or you're nowhere near there, right? And then in the New Testament, when you go further down, the books, you see Paul. He even kind of reiterates that. And I'm with you guys. Like, I'm right beside you. If anything, it's kind of encouraging, depending on how you look at it. Um, the idea of perfectionism, becomes psychologically triggering because everything about the world that we live in has expectations for us,
Yeah.
right? You have to have, X amount of degrees for you to be financially debt for the rest of your life, or you have to, work 80 hours a week to not be able to afford a house, So it's like these expectations are just, insurmountable to some people, right? And when you have something like faith, which to most people they perceive as a help, right?
Yeah.
It's something that makes their life better. It makes their ability to kind of handle situations better, even though that's just very surface level faith. Um, when you throw that wrench in there, like that idea of perfectionism, it almost separates people from the idea that God is attainable,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? My boss, my family, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, they have all these expectations of me. And now I have to align myself with this supernatural like walk that has even more expectations for me, right? Because that's how they're perceiving it is like an external stress. I have to fulfill physically these things for me to be good enough,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To be valued, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of see amongst my peers is it's this value thing where it's I need to either go to church or donate or do this or sell my house or whatever it is. Like there's this physical action that is required of them to win favor in the eyes of God, right?
Yeah.
Um, how does your generation kind of receive that message?
Some of the things that we struggled with, the expectations, definitely vastly different. We dealt with our fathers and grandfathers saying, you're never going to be able to work 80 hours a week. You're never going to be able to do what we did when we were the greatest generation, or we worked so hard and you guys have it so good because of that. And so there was this almost a counterpunch where, we kind of had to deal with that. The older generation for us telling us that we were never good enough. Um, and then along came my relationship with God. And like I talked about earlier, there was definitely some missteps early on where I was trying to be the perfect person on the outside. And the reality of the transformation was me coming to grips with, oh, there's other people around me that are struggling with the same things. There's other people my age that have been told, here's what it looks like, or here's what it means to be a follower of God, and that's not necessarily accurate. And so I came to a point where I had to say, um, those things are wrong, and I wanna step away from that, but I also want to step into something of a real faith in God. And how do I do that? I wrestled with that because I'm, in the same way that, you're finding this out for yourself. And until I recognized that, and there was a question from me, how do I do this? And it was scary. And I came face to face with, this is going to require a life change for me. And there's going to be a lot of scary things because of it. There's going to be, people are going to think differently of me because I've made this choice to follow God. I'm not going to be doing certain things, not because I don't want to, or not because I want to try and put up a facade, but because that's what God requires of me. And once that initial reality hit, it was hard. It was like coming to grips with yourself and saying, "Oh, okay, I'm done with this person, this fake person. I'm done with it. I need to make a decision. I don't know how to get to point B, and that's God, obviously, but I'm just gonna make the decision and start walking." And that was a hard thing, and that's something that's different for each person, I think. You know what I mean? Because there's no roadmap. It requires faith when you're following after God, and it's hard. I would say that. I think a trigger point, or triggering is a big word now, where people are struggling with something and don't know how to deal with it. We had the same thing. We just didn't call it triggering. It was just a struggle, or it was difficult situation. And you had to make a decision. Well, this is not going to derail me. I'm going to keep moving on. I'm going to keep following after God. Don't necessarily know what that means, but and the further I got into that, following after God, and a relationship started where it wasn't just me screaming for help. It was him reaching out, and it's like the direction slowly started to come, and faith started to build.
I just have a lot of thoughts going in my head right now. When I hear like that word triggering, like one of the things that always kind of comes to my mind is uh like something that's programmed. You think of like Pavlov's dog. It's like that bell, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's different now. And I give that word uh you know respect in the sense that it's different now than it was back then because there wasn't this repetitious cycle of information that's just constantly bombarding you.
that's
When
what
you're
I can't relate to
yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's totally new to me.
And a lot of the people that I talk to that are boomers, when they grew up, they had like the 6 o'clock news. They had a newspaper, and that was it. It was kind of
Yeah,
out of sight, out of mind.
yeah,
And I live in a world where my phone, my laptop, my TV, my watch, everything's telling me something's wrong's happening, right? So
yep.
it's like it's very Pavlovian in the sense that no matter what's going on at any given point, there is some kind of physical, spiritual, or emotional reaction I'm getting from it. Right. And that's why I think the nature of perfectionism is such a younger generation division to faith, is because we already have so much sensitivity to external stimuli, right? We're already so conditioned to have
I think
please.
God was surprised by this information age and the rapidly intensifying availability of information. Do you think that caught him by surprise?
No, I don't think so. More so because I think we have like a skewed perception of like what history is, in the sense that what we see information they also had in their own day, but it was just in a different form. Right. We like to kind of give ourselves this kind of weird pat on the back for the technological age that we live in. And we think that nothing has ever come close to that. But, I just don't really believe in that. But I think one of the things that is different from other generations is how how we interface with things. So
Yeah.
there is this difference between um, how we interface with technology versus not having the technology thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but again, I don't think he's surprised,
Yeah.
and I think that's why it takes conversations like this in this age to kind of reach people that are feeling the same thing, where
Mhm.
they're realizing, listen, like I tried church, I tried opening the Bible, I tried praying, but it triggered me. It triggered me because of X, Y, Z. And the biggest questions that I would have is like why and how. The difference between a dog whistle and another noise is the fact that the dog knows it's a whistle versus another noise, right? So a lot of times when we have like these visceral reactions to things, it's based off of the fact that we're associating it to something, much like Jesus did, right? Like he used parables to talk to people. Like what's the parable for my neighbor? What's the parable for my friend at the gym? And maybe it's not a story. Maybe it's just some other way of communication that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
It's like the negotiation aspect of communication. It's what do I have to do to allow you to receive this information without it feeling uh, like it's too much.
Mhm. Yeah. That one, from my experience, it is a weighty thing to follow after God because you're basically handing over your life, and that's a scary thing, um, but well worth it, well worth it. I wouldn't have, looking back, wouldn't have traded that for the world. It gave me so much peace. It gave me in the midst of the tough times, in the midst of the not knowing, uh, and relationships crashing down. It it sustained me. It definitely held me up. So I think that it's sometimes we need to be willing to wade into those moments that trigger us, or make us afraid. Um, and that's where we lean into God all the more. And that was my experience. It hurts going through it. I'm not trying to sugarcoat that at all. I think Isaiah, you would say the same thing. It's definitely not fun at times, but it's worth it.
I think one of the most important things that we can do um, in general is giving, a sense of encouragement, because uh, my job is to ask questions and maybe have commentary, but I try and reserve opinions as much as like the biggest thing that I feel that we are in the position to do is give some kind of an actionable step that would be of some kind of encouragement or be something positive, right? As we kind of wrap up this short series on willingness, you do have to be willing to make the change, even if you're not ready for it, right? And I think in most cases, um, the biggest takeaway that I have from everything, Jesus kind of says to come as you are, right? And I think people take that idea and they think of it in a physical place where maybe they think that they can go to the church and dress up how they normally dress. And that could mean that too. But I also believe that it means to just try to insert something that you feel you can reach out for exactly in the position that you're at, right? In the safety of your own apartment or in the safety of your own home. Uh, Say a prayer that doesn't make sense.
Well
Say a
said.
prayer that doesn't have structure, right? Read a verse that has no like connection to a chapter that you understand. Maybe just open the book randomly. It's sometimes like the best way to create order in your life is through some kind of spontaneity. And I think that God will understand that because he understands that you're trying to find order. You're trying to find him. So just using that willingness to just go through that next step, whether it's a few words at night, while you're eating, while you're driving, you're reading a verse or two a day, you're trying to ask questions about it, you're trying to figure out who God is. And I think that's what God wants us to do is to wrestle with the idea of who he is.
That's well said. Well said. Let me ask you something. This the generational angst. Some of the things that we had to deal with when I was growing up, dude, you were dealing with emotional stress. There was no counseling. There was no people that understood psychology. Not that that's pertinent, but as far as the helps that are available today, and we didn't have anything else. You needed to depend on God, and I think it really brought about that authentic faith that it was just like, this is real. This is my lifeline. It doesn't look pretty, but this is what's going to get me through. Do you think that's out there today, or do you think there's many other options, many other paths that are more easily accessed?
The difficulty with it comes with the idea that just because there's a lot of options for something doesn't mean that it's good for you. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant and the menu is just too big, like
Right.
you never get anything you want, right?
That's the point that I'm trying to make, dude. That's exactly, and it's your information overload. Where this word "triggered" comes from. It's like, wow, that's a real thing, dude. That really is.
Yeah, and I don't want to be dismissive of certain things because obviously certain things do help other people, but when I look at um, a lot of the resolutions at large, whether it be medicinal or psychological or therapy based, you have to kind of ask yourself like, where's the proof that this is truly helping a lot of people?
Mm.
It might be out there. I might be completely ignorant, and I'm very willing to eat my words. When I've been through these realms, you see more people like fall off the ship versus, making it to dry land. And
That needs to be said in some format at some point, because I think that would be highly beneficial for a crowd that's struggling. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. I think it kind of lends with the idea of what's, you know, how do you actually become free from something,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And that is kind of the elevators, sales pitch of faith, where it's like, okay, I can give you something that can really uh, have a lasting, you know, impression on your whole entire life. But it's solely dependent on what you do with it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not just like a potion where if you say a couple prayers and go to a couple services, then everything goes away.
Definitely not that.
Yeah, it's something where you have to work on growing. It's like a
Mhm.
garden. Like if you don't water the plant, it will die.
That's a it's the woman at the well. Did I talk about that last week?
No.
Um, he's coming in, has perfect knowledge of who she is before he even talks to her, and yet leads with questions and compassion, and
Mhm.
saves his admonishment for the end. Go and sin no more, because the notion that we're not going to sin anymore is not realistic.
Yeah, and that's like interesting. You should say that because that's the second part of the question that was asked, which could be like another episode at some point. But they had asked me, "Is it possible to be free from sin?" Right, and it's a difficult thing to answer because you have to define how you're interpreting sin. Like,
Hmm.
are you talking about a collective sin or are you talking
Hmm.
about an individual sin? You know, the idea of it being an individual sin, like there's something that you're specifically struggling with.
Hmm.
Yes, you can be delivered from it, of course. But if we're talking about the whole entire nature of sin, that like every morning you wake up and you look at your neighbor and you just want them to fall down the steps, like, you can't avoid that aspect where like you're in like an ever changing climate. Said, I don't want to do wrong. I don't want to be seen in the eyes of God in, a certain way. And I think that can be very difficult unless someone understands what grace really means,
Hmm.
not just by definition, but
Hmm.
what it means biblically. And also um how God uses like our brokenness for his benefit, right? Um
Huge.
it's nuanced because people want these very black and white answers.
Yeah.
They want to have a yes or no to things. In most cases it's like yes and yes. Okay, these two things can coexist at the same time. It just kind of depends on like how we're looking at it. I liken it to the idea that if you can conceptualize God being infinite and he lives outside of time and space, like how is that possible? But in our world, we only see things in like three dimensions. There's
Right.
other dimensions in three, right?
Absolutely.
Science
Absolutely.
science will back that up.
Hmm.
So if you have that idea that there's like multiple dimensions to things, there's also multiple dimensions to doing wrong, where
Hmm.
it's like there's the things that are the controllable and the uncontrollable. And there's the things that you can be completely free from, and there's the things that just kind of evolve and morph into different things as you grow up, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Where maybe you're not a drug addict, but maybe you have resentment in your heart towards your spouse because they didn't wash the dishes, right? These are still seen in the eyes of God as the same thing. I'm trying to make sure that a lot of the episodes that we do can be almost like if someone didn't know anything about God, they can listen to get something from.
And I heard that, but don't you think this is an entry point to God? Because
Def-
people immediately grapple onto this sin. They know that
right.
God is dealing with sin, and that's the first point of interface. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
like,
Sin is actually like a Greek word. And it's a term that comes from archery, right? And essentially what it means is missing the mark, like you're
hmm.
missing the bullseye,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I think when people think of this word sin, it has like this like instant um satanic connotation. I think what people misinterpret sometimes is the idea that if we all sin, like we all kind of fall short of something.
Mhm.
Even if you don't believe in God, like you fall short every day, you know. Maybe you go to work 5 minutes late, like you fell
Mhm.
short of being there on time, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So there's just this complete nature that people reject when it comes to um, a religious lens for them doing wrong, even though they can admit that they do wrong outside of religion, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a little philosophical debate, but yeah, I'm willing to have it. I
I
just,
think I think it'd be worth it, dude.
yeah,
I'm listening.
yeah. We're gonna wrap it up this week. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I feel as if we're getting a little bit more comfortable with the format,
Same. Same.
and yeah, hopefully it's an enjoyable show for most. It's
Yeah.
enjoyable for us because we get to kind of wrestle these ideas. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do have any questions, feel free to email at us at generationfpodcast@gmail.com. This can be comments, suggestions, questions, anything at all. I hope you guys enjoyed listening, and we hope to see you guys next week. Bye.